When it gets a whipping, it goes crazy, and somebody could actually get hurt by the thing. Think of a fire hose this big around, right? I mean, it just...
Chris Doumit gave everything to the mine. Then he just stopped moving. The gold was still flowing, but Chris had nothing left to give. He worked through pain, stress, and long nights. But this time was different. He walked away from the gold room without a word, leaving tools lined up and buckets stacked. Let us take you to the moment he dropped everything and left behind a shock no one saw coming. The gold room is bleeding. The season began like all the others. Big talk, big goals. Parker wanted 10,000 ounces. That number hung in the air like fog, thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. It sounded brave on camera, but everyone on site knew what it really meant. It meant longer days, fewer breaks, and more broken things to patch. Big Red, Roxanne, and Bob's plant were all running, grinding, screaming for attention. And in the middle of that chaos, Chris stood between disaster and delivery. But something was coming, and it wouldn't wait for anyone.
Right now, I don't think all the coffee and the cigars in the world is going to help. And if I create a bottleneck, it's going to jam up everything. It's going to cause horrific problems.
The sluice boxes gurgled with slurry, loaded with promise. 3 plants running meant 3 times the stress. Every load dumped a new kind of tension. The screens shook, the pumps threatened to stall, the lines buckled under pressure. But Chris held it all together with a wrench in one hand and exhaustion hanging off the other. He wasn't just the gold room guy. He was the guy who knew how to keep the soul of the mine from flatlining. But even the strongest man has a breaking point, and Chris was closer to him than anyone realized. He cleaned everything, checked every spec. Every grain that passed through his hands got treated like it was the last. That kind of precision burns you slow. It's the kind of work that doesn't scream. It whispers, it builds, and by the time it roars, it's already too late. For Chris, the whisper turned into a scream right around mid-season. The crew was stretched so thin the ground beneath them practically cracked. Parker, razor-focused on that 10,000-ounce dream, wasn't pulling anyone off machinery to help. Not one person. That left Chris alone in the gold room, watching buckets pile up like thunderclouds. He never complained. Not once. But that didn't mean he was okay. Something changed in his posture. His steps grew slower. His shoulders didn't bounce back the way they used to. The fire in his eyes dimmed, not gone, but flickering. Then came the moment that shifted everything. He dropped a suggestion, soft, almost like a whisper, about bringing in someone new. Not to replace him, just to help, just to keep the walls from closing in. Tatiana Costa, a top operator, one of the best behind the wheel, but now being considered for a role that demanded something entirely different. The gold room wasn't just a new assignment, it was a test of trust, of control.
We'll take Tatiana.
Tatiana?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much. Yeah. Now I can breathe a little bit.
The decision wasn't easy. Mitch and Tyson weren't thrilled. Machines needed her. But Chris needed help more than they needed perfect haul cycles. Parker agreed. Barely. Begrudgingly. But it was something. A sliver of breathing room for a man who hadn't exhaled in months. Tatiana started her training. Chris watched, instructed, guided. He didn't bark. He didn't criticize. He taught like someone who wanted the job done right, not just done fast. She was sharp, capable, but it was still the kind of shift that rattles a man used to doing everything alone. Every movement she made echoed with the question, was this enough or was it too late? The numbers came in, 70 ounces, then 289, then more. The gold totals made for good television. They made Parker grin. But in the gold room, behind the numbers, the toll was adding up. His fingerprints were on every cleanout that mattered. Every record-breaking total had Chris behind it. Not in the spotlight, in the shadows, where things got done. But this season wasn't like the others. The numbers weren't just bigger, they were brutal. The strain was different. It didn't just challenge the body, it hollowed the spirit. It asked the question no one likes to ask. Is it worth it? Chris didn't answer out loud. He answered with his silence, with the way he paused before starting another shift, with the way he looked at the buckets and didn't rush to pick them up. That pause meant something. He had been through bad seasons before, bad weather, broken machines, even worse decisions. Not the cost in fuel or filters, the cost in people.
74.9. Oh.
For sake, we do all this work. What a pain in the ass. Well, all I can say is thank for the gold price.
The gold room wasn't just a station. It was a trap, a box of pressure that turned men into statistics if they stayed too long. Chris was feeling that heat. Every step, every scoop, every cleanup felt heavier than the last. There were no rest days, no slowdowns, just the endless hum of gears and the constant scream of schedules. That's when the breaking point came into view. It wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Chris didn't shout. He didn't slam tools. He just started wondering, out loud in short, cautious sentences, if he had reached the end. And that was terrifying, because when a man like Chris begins to doubt, it sends a ripple through the whole crew. He was the center of balance, the calming gravity in a world spinning too fast. Parker may have been the leader, but Chris was the anchor. And when the anchor starts to drift, the whole ship feels it. The crew tried to keep pace. They tried to adjust, but nothing stopped the feeling that something fundamental was slipping. Tatiana did her best. She handled the gold. She listened. She worked hard. But she wasn't Chris. No one was. And the room felt different because of it. The equipment kept running. The ounces kept rising. But underneath all that success, something else was happening. The thing that held the team together, quiet commitment, the unspoken promise that Chris would always be there, was cracking. Chris wasn't slacking. He was simply tired, deep tired. Not the kind of tired a nap fixes, the kind that sinks into the bones, the kind that makes a man start thinking about other roads, about home, about breath. The 10,000 ounces loomed. The finish line, if it even existed, was a blur, but Chris was no longer chasing it. He was trying to stay upright. That was the new goal, survive the day. It was the moment when giving everything finally asked for something back, and there was nothing left to give. Leaving doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it begins when normal stops feeling right. The middleman of a monster machine. In the heart of the mine, surrounded by screaming steel and mud-thick ambition, Chris Doumit stood as the man in the middle. Not the man at the top, not the rookie at the bottom, but the one who carried both. He wasn't shouting orders or fumbling with controls. He was doing what he always did, making sure the chaos kept working. Not beautifully, not effortlessly, but working, and that was enough to keep the dream alive. He wasn't built for quitting. His hands were rough with a lifetime of keep going. But the machine around him wasn't just humming anymore, it was devouring. Everything was scaled up this season. The targets, the risks, the noise, especially the noise. It crept in even during sleep, vibrating through bones like a warning bell no one wanted to hear.
Usually it's one of the best mats, the first mat, but what I'm seeing is real fine gold. It's too much water. It's not letting the gold settle where it's supposed to.
This wasn't a gold mine anymore. It was a proving ground. Parker didn't just want to win, he wanted to dominate. The number, 10,000 ounces, wasn't just a stretch goal. It was a declaration, and every man on the ground knew what it really meant. Perfection, no mistakes, no margin, only results. 3 plants, 1 room. 1 man expected to handle it all. It made for great TV. But off camera, it felt like a slow suffocation. The gold room became a crucible. Every misstep, every flake lost, every moment of delay was a blow. Not to Parker, not to the camera crew, but to Chris. He took the hits silently, piling pressure on himself in a way no one else could measure. He wasn't working toward gold anymore. He was just trying not to let anyone down. His body said so first. Soreness didn't leave after sleep. The fatigue had a grip that caffeine couldn't break. It was the kind of exhaustion that no longer reset between shifts. And worse, his mind started drifting. A missed cue here, a delayed reaction there. Nothing dangerous, nothing major. But Chris noticed, and if he noticed, it meant it mattered. The crew noticed too, even if they didn't say it. Mitch looked over more often. Tyson checked in with subtle glances. Everyone had the same unspoken thought. Something's different. Not wrong, just different. A tension in the air that couldn't be pinned down. Even Parker knew the difference. He never said it directly, but he didn't have to. His urgency grew sharper. His check-ins are more frequent. The gold had to keep flowing, but the man who made sure it got cleaned, counted, and captured was starting to burn out.
I told Parker I would stay on the job until either it's not fun anymore or I can't do it anymore. We're getting very close to the I can't do it anymore.
Still, Chris pushed forward. He wasn't wired to walk away from work undone, but the ground under him was shifting. Not the soil, his footing. That quiet certainty he carried through years of washouts, mechanical failures, and sleepless runs had started to erode. He remembered seasons past when the biggest worry was a broken pump or a clogged screen. Now the worry was time. Time to finish. Time to recover. Time to just breathe. He was no longer counting ounces. He was counting moments of silence. The seconds between one emergency and the next. That's what life had become. Waiting for the next system failure. The moment no one saw coming. The moment that would quietly end an era. And then it happened. Not a collapse. Not a dramatic scene. But a moment. Small. Intimate. Unfilmed. The kind of moment only someone like Chris would ever recognize as pivotal. He stood over the sluice box, arms covered in grime, staring at a collection tray. Gold sparkles back up at him. Not much, a few solid ounces. Enough to feel good about. But he didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't react. He just stared. And then he walked away. That was the moment. The shift. The realization that even the gold didn't glow the way it used to. He wasn't a gold miner by birth. He was made into one, forged in mud, sweat, and pressure. But no metal keeps its shape forever. And Parker, driven, focused, relentless Parker, wasn't slowing down. He was accelerating, talking about next season, bigger setups, more ounces, less margin for error. Chris couldn't match that pace anymore. Not with the same fire, not without cost. The cost was creeping in through the cracks, back pain, sleep deprivation, stress levels that spilled into everything. It wasn't about drama, it was about survival. For years, he had been the fixer, the one who kept the lights on when storms hit. But now the storm was inside the cabin, in his ribs, in his spine, in the spaces behind his eyes where sleep should have lived. The pressure to deliver was only part of it. The real weight was the fear. Fear of letting someone down. Fear of stepping away and watching everything collapse. Fear of becoming the guy who gave up instead of the guy who gave everything. But the truth was this. Giving everything means knowing when you got nothing left. And Chris, quietly, reluctantly, painfully, was beginning to understand that. The crew was rallying. New systems were being tested. Tatiana was stepping up, but even with all that effort, there was no replacing the man who kept the heartbeat steady. The gold room had a pulse, and its rhythm was starting to slow. Across the site, the sun rose and fell over the same muddy fields, the same rust-streaked equipment, the same mountain of demands. Chris moved through it like a shadow, there but thinner, still working, still watching. But somewhere in that rhythm, he was letting go. Letting go of the idea that he had to carry everything. Letting go of the belief that the job needed to break him before it was okay to step aside. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It wasn't made in anger. It was made in quiet moments, between cleanups, during tool checks, while waiting for the next load. The kind of moments that give you clarity when the rest of the world is screaming. He looked at the machines, the crew, the gold, and for the first time he saw it from a distance, not as something to conquer, but as something he had already conquered. By the time the gold showed up again, something in Chris had already let go. The man who outlasted the rush. The Klondike doesn't care who you are, doesn't care how many years you've served, how many ounces you've cleaned, or how many times you've saved the operation from the edge. The ground only respects what you can take from it, and Chris Doumit has taken more than his fair share. Not just in gold, but in grit. He didn't just mine the pay dirt, he mined his own endurance, day after day, year after year. Until there was nothing left to dig but truth, it was never about the spotlight. Chris didn't crave camera time or headlines. His worth wasn't measured in interviews or online praise. It was measured in uptime. In how many crises didn't become disasters. In how many crews got through the shift without falling apart. He had been the fixer of broken things. But now the thing that needed fixing was him. He looked around the camp, the tools, the engines, the unspoken language of exhaustion passed between men who had long stopped pretending they weren't tired. The pay streaks were still there. The ounces still rolled in. But something had shifted. Everyone was watching the gold totals. Chris was watching the exit. What happens when the guy who holds the whole thing together steps back? That was the real question. Not for the show, not for Parker, for the crew, the real crew. The ones who bled with him in spring frost and summer sun. He remembered the first time he stood on this ground, not as a miner, as a builder. A carpenter thrown into the middle of a gold fever. No handbook, no plan, just a man with a toolbox and a grin. The ground was foreign then, the task was temporary. But something took root, a challenge too big to walk away from. He didn't just adapt, he thrived. And in doing so became a legend without ever chasing legend status. He became the one they leaned on, the guy who showed up when things broke and stayed long after everyone else called it a day.
You always dry gold outside, never inside. It lets off a poisonous gas, and you will mess yourself up if you don't.
The camera caught glimpses. But the real work, it was always behind the scenes. In the moments when everyone else gave up, and Chris was still elbow deep in mud, coaxing broken equipment back to life. The final cleanouts of the season came with a strange air. Not sadness, not quite, more like reverence. The kind of atmosphere you get when you know something important is winding down. Tatiana had settled into her new role. The crew respected her. She had Chris's nod of approval, and that was worth more than any resume. Parker hit his numbers, or close enough to pretend he did, but the price had been steep, not in dollars, in people, in wear and tear, in the slow realization that the grind doesn't care about your legacy. It just keeps grinding. A few looked up, some didn't, but everyone felt it, like a drop in pressure, like something in the room had shifted. He wasn't quitting, he was closing a chapter. He had already given his everything, and now he was giving himself permission to stop. He left the gold room cleaner than he found it, tools aligned, machines checked, buckets stacked. It was like he wanted it to keep running without a hitch, because that's who he was. Even on the way out, he was holding things together. His absence didn't hit all at once. It crept in the little things, a question no one had the answer to. A fix that took longer than usual. A moment of silence where a laugh used to be. Parker, for all his drive and strategy, understood what he had lost. Chris wasn't just a worker. He was the example. The man who didn't flinch, who didn't quit, who made it look easy even when it wasn't. Replacing him wasn't just a task, it was a warning. A reminder that even the best burn out. And across the Klondike, in some quiet cabin or stretch of road far from the mine, Chris Doumit wasn't watching the show. He was catching his breath. The years had taken a toll, but they had also built something unshakable. A legacy carved in gravel and forged in fire.
The big problem here is somebody with no experience is almost worse than nobody.
Man, I don't care if they have lots of experience, no experience. We can train them, whatever you can find us.
Okay. I'll do what I can as quick as I can.
His name didn't just roll through the credits. It rolled through the veins of everyone who ever stood beside him. The work had tried to break him. It nearly did. But he walked away on his terms. Not broken, not bitter, just finished. Even weeks later, his fingerprints were still on everything. Every filter is still marked with his numbers. Every wrench left exactly where it belonged. The younger crew members copied his routines without even realizing it. They kept checking things twice, not because they were told to, but because that's how Chris would have done it. His discipline had become a system. His patience had become a blueprint. His work ethic had become a ghost that guided the whole operation without speaking a word. Tatiana held the room well. She adapted quickly, understood the timing, the focus, the little details that separated good work from great. But even she admitted, quietly to herself, there was something sacred in how Chris used to run the place. Not sacred because of superstition, sacred because it was earned. In Parker's world, where every mistake cost real money and every delay meant losing ground, having someone like Chris was never optional. It was a necessity. A human failsafe, a part of the engine that couldn't be replaced by steel or software. Chris had faced the worst of it: frozen valves, shattered belts, engine room floods in the dead of night. And yet he showed up every morning with that same easy walk, that same half smile, ready to fix what needed fixing and move on without fanfare. He gave everything and then walked away. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. Did Parker push him too far? Comment below, hit like, and subscribe for more truths no one else dares to tell.